Hey everyone, happy Halloween from the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, Tennessee this year has been scary on offense, and they're busting out the Halloween uniforms this weekend. Solid black with the orange tee. The unis look pretty sweet, and I think it's going to be quite the environment in Neyland Stadium when they do the Halloween themed checkerboard. This time it's going to be orange and black. It's going to look awesome.
Now, that's going to be really good. And, that's always been a great rivalry. And, this year, obviously, Tennessee just trying to kind of keep the line moving.
Well, what's interesting, Joe, is that talk about how great of a coach Mark Stoops is. He's had so many things to overcome at Kentucky, including like absolute domination and rivalries. Florida was one, of course. Like Kentucky hadn't beaten them in like 30 years, and suddenly Mark Stoops has beaten them, I think, 5 out of the last 8 years. But this is one, Joe, that he has not been able to overcome. Like, even with Kentucky being a better football program than Tennessee over, the last 7 or 8 years, I think Kentucky's only beaten them like one time. Tennessee has still maintained a stranglehold on this rivalry. And Joe, I don't see this year as being any different.
Yeah, that's true. There's been a lot of games. I can even remember, like in the 2000s, when Kentucky had Andre Woodson. Like they had some close, just heartbreaking losses to Tennessee. It just kind of has been a narrative for them in this rivalry. And yeah, I think this year, the way I see this game playing out is I clearly expect Tennessee to win. I do think that Kentucky will put forth a good effort and maybe make this game a little bit more interesting than some people might expect. And one reason for that, I think, is that Kentucky's pace of play will eat up a lot of clock, kind of allow them to steal some possessions as far as time of possession for Tennessee. And I can see this in a game where Hendon Hooker has to capitalize on limited opportunities.
Well, Joe, I think that's true. And I do think, Kentucky does have a very slow pace of play that could affect Tennessee's offense. But what worries me about this game for Kentucky is that they have no passing game. I know everybody's like so obsessed with Will Levis and, oh, this guy should be a first round draft pick. I've always thought he was an extremely overrated quarterback, and nothing I've seen this year has changed my opinion when it comes to that. They don't throw the ball very well. And one thing this Tennessee defense does really great, they're much maligned. Everybody talks about, look at what Bryce Young did coming off being injured, throwing for 500 yards. You can throw the ball against Tennessee, but people cannot run the ball against them. I watched that Alabama game, and they really did shut down Jahmyr Gibbs, who's a lot better than any running back Kentucky has. I think Rodriguez is good, but he's not in the same league as Gibbs is. I don't think Kentucky's going to be able to run it on Tennessee the way people think they are, though.
Well, I think that even if they're not as effective as they often are, I see them still picking up enough first downs here and there. And also, think about how they bleed the play clock. It affected them at the end against Ole Miss. It kind of worked against them because they're not used to the hurry up. They're that kind of old fashioned team that lets it go all the way to 2 or 3 seconds before they snap it. And I think that's going to add up in just, over time in the course of the game, steal some possessions from Tennessee, where, like I said, I fully expect Tennessee to win. I would say by probably 10 to 14 points, but I could definitely see a situation, where Tennessee looks at, the time of possession at the end of the game, and let's say they've only possessed the ball for, 20 to 25 minutes.
Well, Joe, let me ask you this: who's the most probably comparable team that Tennessee has played to Kentucky? In my mind, it's LSU, and they dominated LSU. LSU is a running quarterback. They like to run the football, not a great passing attack in my mind. Good defense, and Tennessee wiped the floor with them. And I kind of see a similar kind of game in this, maybe not to the same level, but I just don't think that. I think Kentucky's not going to generate enough offense to really be in this game. I could see them maybe hang within 14 points. I was a little nervous about betting Tennessee in this one because I think it was like a 14 and a half point spread, which seemed a little too much for me. In my mind, I look at it as maybe like a 31-17 Tennessee win. That's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking in the range of either 30 to 20 or 30 to 17. And I think that another thing that adds to it is I feel like for Kentucky, this is a free shot. Whereas I feel like, Tennessee, naturally is probably playing a little bit of the look ahead, thinking about Georgia coming up. And I just think that there's an element here that, based on the style of play of Kentucky, that makes this more interesting than Tennessee wants. But like I said, I definitely expect Tennessee to make the plays when they need to and end up, winning in the second half.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a look ahead factor. And I think that's what accounts for the 14 points. I think it'd be worse than that if it wasn't Georgia coming up next, because, as I said, I think that Tennessee's off defense is very easy to take care of, to take advantage of if you have a passing game. Kentucky hasn't shown me they have that, and Tennessee does have a good rush defense.
Okay.
Joe, moving on, let's go to the Big Ten. And for my lock of the week, we're talking Sparty and Michigan. Last year, Joe, this is one of the games of the college football season. And it was also the game that really lined the green of Mel Tucker's wallet with not just things in Michigan State, but man, he got paid a lot of money for one victory. And, I don't know who his agent is, if that's Jimmy Sexton or who's the mega agent that has Mel Tucker, but could they just get bamboozled in that negotiation right there? I mean, if you watch the Michigan State game last year, a lot of really questionable calls. JJ McCarthy played awful. Like, every time Harbaugh would take him in off the bench, he would just fumble it on the first play that he was in. And you could see that Michigan was clearly the better team. The only thing they didn't have was Kenneth Walker. And Kenneth Walker played like an absolute beast last year. And Michigan State was able to get the huge upset, and they signed Mel Tucker to this $95 million guaranteed deal, and has even won a football game since they signed that contract.
It doesn't seem like it. I mean, it's hard for me to think about any notable wins since that time. But I remember with Kenneth Walker back, September, October, he was kind of, in that fringe Heisman conversation, the way he was playing. And then, just kind of went out the door the rest of the season. But yeah, this is a game, where Michigan State comes in, clearly outmatched. And then you're right, there's definitely that motivational edge that will inspire Michigan to probably play better as well.
Yeah, Joe, this is a big line, and I usually don't like to bet Big Ten lines at this level. It's 22.5. But, Joe, I think there's a murder in Halloween going to happen in Ann Arbor for this game. I mean, Michigan showed me, like, with how they just thoroughly dominated what I think is a very good Penn State team who I've seen with my own eyes, that they have a really great offensive attack. They actually have a quarterback who can throw it now, and J.J. McCarthy, who's also got some legs. But their two-headed beasts of running back with Blake Corum and Robinson are really showing out. And I think they're going to absolutely dominate Michigan State. This Michigan State team, they had a good year last year, pretty much in my mind, almost solely because of Kenneth Walker. They don't have Kenneth Walker this year. They're showing that Michigan State made a super bad investment on Mel Tucker, I guess off the thought that LSU was going to hire him if they didn't, which, by the way, when they got Brian Kelly, if they had Brian Kelly on their mind, they were never going to hire Mel Tucker. And so I think this is going to be an absolute blowout. I'm looking to Michigan to win this game like 48-7, maybe something even worse than that.
No, I can certainly see something like that coming to fruition. And, that kind of reminds me of, with Kenneth Walker playing on Michigan State last year, all I could think about at the end of the season is how good would Wake Forest have been last year if he had still been there with Sam Hartman. And so that's a perfect segue for my lock of the week. I'm going with Wake Forest, only favored by 3.5 over Louisville. And I think that Wake Forest is definitely going to exceed that margin.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's a great pick. I'm a huge Wake Forest fan. I've been betting them hard all year. I think Sam Hartman is the best quarterback in America. I mean, this is a hot take right here. I'm sure everybody's gonna get really upset. Like, what about Bryce Young? What about C.J. Stroud, Hendon Hooker? When you watch Sam Hartman, he does incredible things with not a lot of talent, and he always puts it in the exact right spot every time. I mean, Joe, he scored 48 points against Clemson. Nobody does that. I mean, he's that good, and their offense is so hard to defend. I'm a huge fan of Sam Hartman, and when it comes time in the draft this year, that's who I'm really hoping the Saints get as a quarterback, because I'm a huge Sam Hartman fan. I think that them only being favored by 4 points over Wake Forest, over over Louisville is a severe understatement right there. And I think Wake Forest yet again goes out and wipes the floor with another good ACC opponent. I mean, they killed Boston College last week. They beat up on Florida State. I mean, they've dominated teams all season long, and the only loss they have is a small one possession game in overtime to Clemson. And I said this to you before the show, Joe. If this was a 12-team playoff, I would take Wake Forest to win their first game in the playoff. I think they're that good.
No, they really are. You hate it for them personally that they couldn't overcome Clemson. That may cost them as far as winning the ACC this year, but that would still be something historic to go 11-1. If they could run the table and maybe have like an Orange Bowl berth, and that would be a great season. If they could do something like that. So a lot to play for. And Sam Hartman, he's playing outstanding, especially coming into the season. We didn't know for sure if he was even going to be able to play.
Absolutely. I mean, really, really great showing when he was going to be gone supposedly for the first half of the season. Came back after like 3 games, and it's been great ever since. All right, Joe, sticking with these great quarterbacks, all you Ohio State fans out there are probably going to be upset that I said Sam Hartman was better than C.J. Stroud. Well, C.J. Stroud has his first opportunity to play a real team this week. Ohio State's done nothing but play high school teams this entire season. Everyone's putting Ohio State as the greatest thing since sliced bread. Their receivers, even without Jackson Smith and Jigba, really been showing out with Marvin Harrison Jr. Running backs, of course, looking excellent, even without Davion Henderson. Mayan Williams has just played out of this world, but they haven't played anybody. The best team they played is Notre Dame, and that's a very bad sentence because Notre Dame is a shell of itself this year. I also would throw it as a little extra bonus lock of the weekend. Definitely take Syracuse on the points against Notre Dame because that's going to be a beatdown, I think. You can also get the under on that game. But Ohio State, I mean, this is their first opportunity to play a good team. Penn State, I mean, I saw them in person just obliterate Auburn, but then they went out against a really good Michigan team, granted at Michigan, and they just got ran all over. And so this is a fascinating game to me, Joe, because it's going to be at Penn State. I don't know why it's not their whiteout game. They did it for Minnesota last week, I guess, because they couldn't get this game as a night game. I think that's probably the reason why. But so it's going to be a great atmosphere at home. And I'm really interested to see what happens because I'm a little worried right now with Penn State with how they yet again seem to be questioning Sean Clifford and, trying to have this freshman guy go out there, which I think they've always needed to go all in with Clifford. I think he's really good. And every time I see him, there's a lot of teams right now, including Auburn, that I would love to have Sean Clifford right now. And it's just going to be interesting to me to see the excitement of the Penn State fans, whether they stick with Sean Clifford and whether they can be competitive in this game.
Now, you're right. It's a fascinating matchup. I would say it's the second most intriguing game for me on the Big Ten slate this season, outside of the game with Ohio State and Michigan coming up in a month or so. It's hard to get a read on it because, Penn State being at home, you feel like that's an aspect where Ohio State's lost there in the past, this program. One thing that makes me feel good about Ohio State in this game is that I feel like even though they've had some injuries, we haven't seen maybe the name brand receivers show out like we would have expected. We've seen some other guys emerge, I think, that has given them depth that is going to help them in a game like this. We've also seen the running game be really good. And Minnesota's running back had a 100-plus yard game against Penn State last week. But most notably, Julian Fleming, who was former number 1 wide receiver recruit in the nation, the guy that I've always been really high on, but he's just never really performed well. He finally had a breakout game at receiver for Ohio State last week against Iowa and had a 79-yard touchdown pass or touchdown reception, was their leading receiver. And so I think that having him as a luxury as your number 3 option really helps C.J. Stroud kind of have an embarrassment of riches with the running game added in that really sets him up to have some success in this matchup.
But Joe, one thing I do want to say about Ohio State, I was marking about their schedule earlier. I was impressed with going to Iowa and beating them 54-10. That's not an easy thing to do. That being scoring 54 points on Iowa's defense. Now, holding Iowa to 10 points, that's like a mega offensive output for this pathetic Iowa offense. I mean, they might as well have had Aaron Rodgers out there scoring 10 points. But, in terms of scoring 54 against that really good defense, that is a yeoman's effort right there. And so I think that really does show you how good this Ohio State offense is.
I think it was their biggest margin of victory ever against Iowa in their history in the conference. And so, yeah, I mean, they're coming in with a wave of momentum. But again, Penn State's at home. So I kind of expect a pretty good game, a competitive game that's pretty close throughout. But I'll just give the edge to Stroud in the receivers late to pull it out.
Joe, I don't know if there's any factor that would have led me to like picking Penn State to win this game, but I do wish they would have had this as the night game and the whiteout game, because having been to one of those, it is an incredible atmosphere and it can affect the way things go. I think if that were the case and it was the whiteout game, maybe I'd say this would be a one possession game. But with it being an 11 a.m. game, even at Penn State, I'm a little worried that it's not going to be quite the atmosphere that I'm used to. And I really think that based on the way I saw Michigan just run all over Penn State, that I think that you're going to see Mayan Williams have a really good game, and that after a little bit of getting beat down with the runs, those receivers are going to look just really open for CJ Stroud. And I do think that Ohio State wins this game. It's, the number, I think it's a 14.5 point spread. I think Penn State's going to put up a fight. I'm looking at a score that's maybe in the range of 38-24, I think.
Okay. Now, I see it being probably a one possession game until the end. I think that Ohio State probably wins by, I would say, 5 to 7 points.
Okay. All right, Joe. Speaking of one possession games and what's something that's going to be exciting, we have another game going back to the AAC that, if we had a 12-team playoff this year, I would say this game probably means a lot. This year, with Cincinnati having already lost to Arkansas, which in retrospect, you're like, how did they do that? The Cincinnati and UCF's a really interesting game, and big game for Gus Malzahn to maybe get himself a chance to have an AAC title this year.
Yeah, it kind of like will decide in many ways who's in the driver's seat for the conference the rest of the way. Who could also be in that conversation for a New Year's Six bowl berth later in the year too. And I think, I'm really interested to see how Cincinnati does in this game, traveling on the road. You're not really missing much of a beat after the departure of so many good players from last year's team. And then speaking of good players, just want to see John Rice Plumlee on this stage. He's heated up lately, had a big game, I think, last week. And I want to see if he can kind of continue that against one of his biggest tests of the year against Cincinnati.
Yeah, Joe, I actually kind of like UCF in this game. The bounce house down in Orlando is a really good environment for college football. UCF, it started off the season a little slow, but they've really picked it up lately. I think they won their last game like 77-7. And Cincinnati hasn't really impressed me that much this year. And I think they went out last week and they played they beat SMU by like 4 points or something. I mean, it wasn't exactly like a performance that really got you excited about Cincinnati football. I think UCF's playing better. They're at home. I like Gus Malzahn and the Gus Bus to win this one.
Yeah, I concur as well, Dan. And another point I would add to that is that Cincinnati has not lost the conference game in, 3 years? And so this is something where you feel like this is the opportunity having to go on the road where they're probably going to finally lose. And I see UCF winning, probably like storming the field, really celebrating.
Joe, it's Orlando on Halloween weekend. There's going to be some people in those stands that are wearing crazy things. I think it's going to be a tough atmosphere for Cincinnati on this one.
I think so.
All right, Joe. Let's go and let's move on to the disappointing part of the SEC right here. Starting on with Ole Miss and A&M. Really depressing game for both these teams right now. I mean, A&M, of course, started the season so high, having that number 6 ranking. And of course, we've seen what has happened with their just, dumpster fire of a season. Ole Miss comes in off their worst game of the year, definitely the worst half they've maybe had the entire Lane Kiffin tenure. And, this is a game that, of course, if Ole Miss can get up for it, they win this, they still have a chance to maybe win the SEC West, depending on what happens in the Alabama LSU game. But Joe, there's a lot of questions to be had. You think about the offensive line. Are they going to be able to hold down, which is a good A&M defensive line? for the running attack. LSU was able to run the ball really well against Ole Miss. Is Devon A-Chain on par to have a really good game? But then on the A&M side, you don't have, Max Johnson's hurt for the season. Haynes King hasn't really been the guy. Where's A&M going to get their offense? Joe, in my mind, this looks like this could be a very ugly game, I think.
I could really see that, Dan. I think that A&M's defense, has kind of been the best unit for them this year. And it's fascinating for me schematically with DJ Durkin, the former Ole Miss defensive coordinator, now on the A&M side, in the chess match that we're going to see with his defense against Lane Kiffin's offense. And so I think it could get ugly, but I think there's also, some very fascinating factors at play here too that make it compelling. But yeah, I think that one thing that could give Ole Miss the slight edge here is the questionable quarterback play for A&M. And once again, it's not like Jackson Dart, is on that, just top tier level yet. But I definitely prefer him to Haynes King. And I think that he's more dynamic than King and can do more with his feet. Whereas King, I feel like, is the complete antithesis to some of these quarterbacks that are more mobile that Ole Miss struggles against. And I think that Ole Miss can get home against King and blitz him better and actually sack him, and he's not going to be able to evade the pass rush.
Joe, I think that is the single difference in this game is Haynes King's immobility, the fact that he can't run. I think that's a big problem here because you're right. The quarterbacks that have taken advantage of Ole Miss all season have been the mobile quarterbacks. Robbie Ashford, Jaden Daniels, Will Levis to an extent. Although they couldn't get it done in the red zone, they were able to get down there a lot. But Haynes King isn't able to run. Now he's tough. I mean, we saw what he took against Alabama. He could take a bunch of hits, but I just don't see their offense getting a whole lot done. And Joe, in my mind, this game is whoever scores 24 points wins.
I can see that. I think that Ole Miss having a great kicker helps them too. In a game like this, I could see it coming down to a field goal. Kind of similar to that Shea Patterson game about 6 years ago when Ole Miss won on the last second field goal. And I think that for Ole Miss and A&M, really both. I mean, for A&M, it's a game you got to have just with how the season's going. For Ole Miss, it's a game that's the ultimate swing game on the schedule. You talk about still having the opportunity to somewhat control your own destiny depending how the SEC West goes with Alabama, LSU. But even if, Ole Miss loses to Alabama, as most will expect, there's still a great opportunity to win a game like this, to go into the bye week, get healthy, and then if you could beat Arkansas and beat Mississippi State, 10-2 for the second straight year is very much obtainable. And that would be outstanding for Ole Miss to do that in back-to-back years. And so I think there's a lot of reasons to be motivated, and that would probably send you back to another big bowl game.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, this is a big game because in my mind, they're sitting right there on the edge of the knife. You win this game, you have that opportunity, I think, a very realistic opportunity to maybe win the SEC West, at the very least, only drop 2 games. But if you lose this game, suddenly the rest of these games all look eminently losable. You could lose to Arkansas. You might even lose to Mississippi State. You could certainly lose to Alabama. And, this season could be one that had dreams of SEC West championships going to an 8-5 season. And so this is the kind of game you got to win. A&M is struggling right now. Yes, it's a tough road environment. We saw they wilted last week and won, but Ole Miss is a better football team. And so this is going to be one of the tougher coaching jobs for Lane Kiffin right now.
Yes. And you add in going on the road aspect, having to deal with that crowd volume, and Ole Miss had issues with the snap count sometimes this year and the offensive line being reshuffled. And so you worry about communication a little bit with Dart and the rest of the team on offense. But, at the end of the day, I think another thing that helps Ole Miss, if Evans can play, or just in general, the running game, I think it is good for Ole Miss.
I think it's important to have both the running backs. When we saw how tired Judkins got last week, when he really did play very well in the first half, but in the second half, he was a non-factor because he got tired. They need Evans out there to spell him.
Because if they have 2, that trumps the 1 for A&M.
And Joe, I think injuries can be a huge thing in this game. Injuries and suspensions. Ole Miss, is AJ Finley going to come back? Is Brown going to come back? Is Evans going to come? Their offensive lineman, I think, is their Miss offensive lineman, I think, is out for this game. On the A&M side, though, interesting story, Joe. I don't know if you heard about this. Jimbo Fisher suspended 4 players for this game based on the fact that before the South Carolina game, they were caught smoking marijuana in the locker room. Can you believe that? Before a road football game, he had players doing this.
Yeah, no, that I did not know that. That does surprise me. Yeah, I just don't know, really what to think. It's just with A&M right now, the losses that we've seen so far on the schedule, it speaks to the team just not playing at the level we expected, but it also speaks to something internally is just not right there.
Yeah, I mean, and like the story that I just told you tells you that. In my mind, I think it's a little bit of how entitled his players are probably feeling right now. I mean, there's no secret that A&M was the one that put out the biggest NIL money for all their players. That's the known thing. That's what got Saban so mad in the offseason. And one thing that I think about, Joe, when you have dealing with kids that are 18 to 22 and suddenly they're going to be paid all this money, how are you going to control them? And how are you going to get them to buy into the system and not think that they're untouchable? And I think what happened right there is a great example of that.
Right. You kind of see players start behaving like professionals. And, these college coaches are used to dealing with college athletes, not professional athletes. And the dynamic of how you deal with the different ones is historically so different.
Yeah. And so, let me just say that this is allegedly what what the suspensions were for, but I feel like that's pretty well out there right now. That's what it is. But I think that really goes to the scariness of this age of the NILs, where some of those players come in and they're making millions of dollars already.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right, Joe. Let's end with probably not a lot of players that are making $1 million. And to be honest, it was funny when we were doing show prep. I completely forgot about this game, which shows you how terrible of a job Brian Harsin is doing for Auburn right now, and how incredibly unimportant Auburn football is right now. I completely forgot about this game. They're playing Arkansas this week. Auburn and Arkansas both coming off byes. It's an 11 a.m. game. This is sadly, Joe, a game that probably is the best chance that Auburn has for a win against an SEC team the rest of the year. Arkansas has really been very bad lately. I mean, you talk about the fact they got wiped, they got destroyed by Mississippi State. They did get to come back and they had a pretty good win against BYU. They beat BYU on the road, beat them by 17. That's a solid win. Joe, this game really comes down to, I think, running the football on both sides. The team that is able to run the ball the best is going to be the one that wins. Auburn's rush defense has been atrocious this year. They've had 2 games where they gave up over 300 yards rushing. Penn State, with their fabulous duo of freshman running backs with Katron Allen and Ellington, just dominated Auburn. And then Ole Miss, of course, had 3 100-yard rushers. Jackson Dart, Judkins, and Evans all went over 100 yards against Auburn. And Joe, that's what scares me about this game is I don't see how this Auburn defense, even with a week off, can get good enough to suddenly be able to defend against Rocket Sanders and KJ Jefferson.
No, that's true. And I could really see both teams just running the ball like almost at will. Where, at the end of the day, to your point, you kind of forget about this game. But I could see for some reason, with it being close to Halloween, just something about it, even though it's 2, bad teams, I could actually see it being kind of an entertaining game as far as the final score.
Yeah, Joe, I actually do think this could be kind of an interesting game. I mean, it's going to be in Auburn. You're right, it's Halloween. 11 a.m. Games in Auburn on Halloween are always fun. In my mind, I remember from being a student there, the Ole Miss game, I feel like was always the Halloween game we'd always go to, and they were always really interesting, tight games. I felt like that happened at 11 a.m. This game, in my mind, probably going to be a lot more high scoring than most people think. I considered taking the over in this game. I think it was like 60.5, which in my mind is probably going to get over. But yeah, I think it's going to be a 1-score game. I don't think either one of these teams are very good. I like Arkansas a little bit better at the end of a game to close it out. Nothing about Brian Harson's track record shows me that he won't just lay an egg when it gets to be a close game at the end of the fourth quarter and do something ridiculous that costs Auburn the game, or that his players won't just drop the football for no reason and turn it over a lot. I'm going to go with Arkansas wins this game 41-37.
No, I think that's right on. I really think it's going to be a game where I could see like the starting running backs for both teams eclipsing like 150 yards, maybe even flirting with 200, and where it's almost like you're handing it off, and the teams are playing. It's at the end of the game like Pro Bowl, like lack of defense.
Yeah, Joe, I could legitimately see multiple 100-yard rushers for both teams. I could see Tank and Jarquez both get over 100 yards, and I could see Rocket and KJ Jefferson both get over 100 yards in this game.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think so.
So we'll see, Joe. Apparently, the Auburn AD search is getting narrowed, and that they're expecting to hire somebody by next week. I think that's the reason that you haven't seen the change happen with Brian Harson yet. I think he probably is going to get to coach out through the end of the season. Um, he obviously he has to win this game if he wants to have any chance of remaining, but I don't think that's going to be enough, even if he does somehow win this game.
You got this one, and then the Mississippi State game the next week could also be an interesting opportunity.
And A&M, they're all there. I mean,
Yeah.
I think he would maybe have some small chance if he could beat Arkansas State and A&M. I don't see it, but maybe so.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll see y'all next week. Hopefully we're talking about a big bounce back win for Ole Miss. As an Auburn fan, I don't know whether I want Brian Harsin to win this game because I really am just kind of not ready for that narrative to be done. Uh, and we'll see in Big Ten land whether Michigan is finally able to get that much needed win for Jim Harbaugh over Michigan State, who he's been surprisingly bad against, hopefully in dominant fashion, and whether Ohio State can go to Happy Valley and get a big win on the road. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.